In the first quarter of 2026, the global economic architecture broke down. At two simultaneous critical junctions located across the globe, the physical mechanics of global trade came to an abrupt, grinding halt. At the first friction point, Brent crude oil spiked to $126 a barrel, instantly triggering a 40% collapse in the global production of urea fertilizer. At the second point, NVIDIA was forced into a $4.5 billion write-down of stranded AI chips, while Western defense manufacturing supply lines effectively froze. This map shows global supply flows, with failures localized in two critical nodes: the maritime energy corridors of the Persian Gulf and the technology hubs of Silicon Valley and Taiwan. These events are expressions of the same economic phenomenon, chokepoint warfare. The technology crisis ignited when the United States' strategy of targeted export controls provoked a physical materials counter-embargo from China. Simultaneously, the energy crisis followed the launch of military strikes known as Operation Epic Fury. The resulting retaliatory blockade severed access to 20 million barrels of crude and 20% of global liquefied natural gas every day. These outcomes represent the logical result of an economic model that prioritized intellectual design while the physical industrial base was externalized. When nations weaponize, the material choke points of trade, intellectual property dominance, and financial capital lose their leverage. The Western hold over the global economy relied on a single bottleneck: extreme ultraviolet, or EUV, lithography. This image shows the massive scale of an ASML lithography system. These machines etch transistors at the 7-nanometer scale, requiring over 100,000 specialized components to function. U.S. containment policy assumed that severing access to this specific hardware and its associated design software would permanently stall the technological development of its rivals. This is an NVIDIA processing chip. The strategy specifically targeted this hardware to cut off the processing power required to train large artificial intelligence models. But this approach treated technology as a static, hoarded commodity. Technology is a productive force. If a society has the scientific capacity and industrial depth, it will reproduce what it cannot buy. When sanctions eliminate the option to purchase a critical component, the requirement to build a physical alternative becomes the only path forward. This smartphone contains a 7-nanometer processor manufactured through a domestic workaround, maintaining production despite lacking access to restricted equipment. Denied the scale of the most advanced chips, developers use their massive physical manufacturing capacity to prioritize algorithmic efficiency instead. This efficiency allowed for the rapid deployment of artificial intelligence into general-purpose robotics, dropping hardware costs to a fraction of Western alternatives. This is embodied intelligence. It is the integration of AI directly into the material base. Inside continuous factory production, when robotic systems begin manufacturing other robotic systems without human involvement, the advantage compounds. Restricting technology access to a state with state-directed industrial depth does not freeze its development. It actively breaks the creator's monopoly by forcing the creation of a commodity alternative. The vulnerabilities exposed in silicon pale in comparison to raw material chemistry. In October 2026, Beijing implemented retaliatory extraterritorial export controls on rare earth elements. This flowchart shows the extreme difficulty of isolating individual rare earth elements at a 99.99% purity level, an operation requiring over 50 distinct chemical stages. Because the West offshored this highly toxic, low-margin process, a single geographic node controls 90 intellectual property and design patents hold no real value if a nation lacks the physical processing infrastructure required to actually assemble the product. This dynamic is even more unforgiving in the kinetic theater. Following Operation Epic Fury, sea mines and drone swarms effectively saturated the Strait of Hormuz. This research paper documents the shift in the global energy landscape and the total closure of the world's most critical maritime chokepoint. Unescorted traffic halted entirely, leaving 20 million barrels of crude stranded every single day. This shows a very large crude carrier sitting idle, completely unable to navigate the corridor. Financial markets immediately absorbed a geopolitical risk premium as high-frequency trading bots reacted to satellite flare data from the region. Land-based pipelines and the release of strategic reserves are mathematically incapable of plugging a supply gap of this magnitude. This diagram maps the effect that connects the loss of liquefied natural gas to global agricultural failure. A force majeure declaration at major facilities instantly starves the primary feedstock required for nitrogen-based fertilizers. Production plummets by 40%. The consequence is a spike in fertilizer costs that directly threatens the Asian Kharif sowing season and destabilizes global food security. A localized military shock in maritime energy transit leads to a cascading failure in the global food supply, exposing the structural fragility of just-in-time models. The data from 2026 allows us to directly compare the structural health of a financialized economic base against a heavily industrial one. This matrix compares these two models. On the left, Western utilities spent $43 billion on share buybacks while physical grid infrastructure decayed. Conversely, Chinese capital focused on physical capacity, adding 277 gigawatts of solar power and outproducing U.S. shipbuilders by a factor of 232. Maintaining military and industrial position requires massive, continuous physical scale. States are forced to shift away from brittle global trade networks toward localized energy sovereignty. A nation cannot successfully sustain a multi-theater great power competition while its industrial foundation is being hollowed out. Ultimately, warfare and technological dominance are at their core strictly matters of massive raw material consumption and physical output. The influence previously sustained through intellectual property and financial capital is facing a material limit. Global power is increasingly concentrated in states that maintain direct control over the physical supply chain, from raw mineral extraction to the automated factory floor.